Imagine waking up one morning to learn that your country has gone bankrupt. The money in your pocket is losing value by the hour. Banks have closed their doors. The president appears on television and says, "All private banks in the country now belong to the state. Your savings are frozen. Your future is uncertain." This is not a movie scene. This was the reality for millions of Mexicans on September 1, 1982. A proud and ambitious country collapsed under the weight of its debts and effectively went bankrupt. Yet just a few years earlier, Mexico was a rising star. It was on the verge of becoming rich from oil. It was the symbol of the idea that the developing world can shape its own destiny. Banks in New York, London, and Frankfurt were lining up to lend. The government took on massive debts because it believed oil revenues would pay for everything. Politicians said they were freeing themselves from dependence on the United States and leading a new era. By the late 1970s, Mexicans had truly begun to feel that we made it. But history's timing is ruthless. The world was in turmoil. The oil shocks of the 1970s had shaken the global economy. Mexico's rise was born out of this chaos. The United States was struggling with high inflation. In 1979, Paul Volcker took over the U.S. Central Bank and was determined to crush inflation. To do so, he raised interest rates sharply. For Mexico, this was a ticking time bomb. Because it had borrowed in dollars and at variable interest rates. Every time interest rates rose in the United States, Mexico's debt grew. Every time oil prices fell, its revenues shrank. At home, optimism was being pumped. President José López Portillo said the future is bright. Oil was the new gold, and Mexico had plenty of it. The logic was simple: borrow now, invest in growth, and later pay it all back with oil revenues. Does this logic sound familiar to you? Tomorrow's income will cover today's spending. That is the common sentence of economic bubbles. By 1981, the warning signs were becoming clear. Oil prices began to fall. Revenues declined, but the debt burden was growing. The peso was overvalued. Inflation was rising. The wealthy began moving their money abroad. Homes in Miami, Swiss accounts, safes in Texas. Capital flight began. López Portillo defied the trend and said, "I will defend the peso like a dog." It was a strong line. But history does not forgive empty defiance. At the beginning of 1982, the peso was bleeding. The state's foreign exchange reserves were running out. International credit channels were closing. Investors no longer believed in the happy ending story. The breaking point came in August 1982. Finance Minister Jesus Silva Herzog Flores flew to New York and said, "Mexico cannot pay the principal on its debt." A 3-month moratorium was declared. In other words, a de facto default. This shook not only Mexico, but the global financial system. Billions of dollars held by US and European banks were at risk. One domino had fallen. Was Brazil next? Argentina? Chile? Venezuela? Soon, fear turned into reality. The Latin American debt crisis began. For the average Mexican on the street, the issue was not IMF negotiations. It was seeing prices on supermarket shelves double. It was being unable to find dollars at exchange offices. It was watching their savings melt away. And then came the moment no one expected. On September 1, 1982, López Portillo delivered his final address to the nation. In a live radio and television broadcast, he announced that all private banks were being nationalized. Overnight, all banks became state-owned. Foreign exchange trading was restricted. In Congress, there was thunderous applause. On the streets, people stood frozen. Think about it. Imagine a leader going on TV and saying, "Your bank account is now under state control. Your salary, your savings, your credit." Some cheered, saying it served the rich right. Others panicked, because trust had been broken. For foreign investors, this was the final alarm. The peso collapsed even further. Inflation exploded. The crisis crossed borders. The IMF stepped in, but with conditions. Spending was cut. Subsidies were removed. Wages were frozen. For the public, the rescue package turned into punishment. The 1980s in Mexico are still remembered as the lost decade. A generation grew up with broken hopes. Middle-class dreams collapsed. The rhetoric of sovereignty turned into dependence on international creditors. And let's be honest, this is not just Mexico's story. In 2008, banks in the United States and Europe came to the brink of collapse. Governments bailed them out, but the price was unemployment and lost homes. In 2013, bank accounts in Cyprus were frozen and deposits were seized. Argentina experienced repeated peso collapses. Turkey battled high inflation. Even debt ceiling debates in the United States show how fragile trust really is. The lesson is universal: money is trust. If people trust their money, their banks, and the system, the economy works. When trust cracks, no decree can stop panic. You can nationalize banks. You can print money. You can seize vaults. But you cannot force people to trust. López Portillo seized the banks to defend sovereignty. But a few years later, those banks were privatized again, and many were sold to foreign investors. The state absorbed the cost of the collapse. Ownership changed hands. The irony is right there: real wealth is not inflated balance sheets during boom times. Real wealth is resilience. It is the ability to stay standing when the storm comes. Mexico said it would defend the peso like a dog. But in the end, the peso drowned, and the people paid the price. Real wealth is not inflated balance sheets during boom times. Real wealth is resilience. It is the ability to stay standing when the storm comes. Mexico said it would defend the peso like a dog. But in the end, the peso drowned, and the people paid the price.